Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the podcast. With me today, I have Ari Weinswig, who is co-founding partner of Zingerman's community of businesses. Now, before I introduce Ari, I just wanted to tell you that Inc. magazine once called Zingerman's the coolest small company in America. And they've also been featured in Harvard Business Review, on MSNBC for their business practices. And in addition, Bo Burlingham, the author of Small Giants, cited Zingerman's as a model for organizations that define success more creatively than just being big and getting as big as fast as you can. So with that in mind, no pressure, Ari, welcome to the show.
Good morning, or afternoon there, I guess. Good morning
Yes.
here.
And so, Ari, for the benefit of our listeners and kind of readers, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about the kind of the work you do in Zingerman's and so on and so forth?
Sure. I think it's easiest probably to start at the beginning.
Sure.
We're in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is a smallish by American standards, college town, university town. So maybe somewhat akin to going to Cambridge. We're it's called the Midwest, but I think more literally it's the Mid-East. We're about 4 hours drive east of Chicago. So just to place it on the geographic map, and we're in southeastern Michigan.
Right.
But anyways, so I personally, my background, I grew up in Chicago. I came to Ann Arbor to go to school at University of Michigan. I studied Russian history with a particular focus, as you know, on the anarchists, which I'm guessing will come up in our conversation at some
Indeed.
point. After graduating with my history degree, of course, there is nothing you can really do with a history degree except get more degrees, which is what I was supposed to do. But mostly when I graduated, I just had what David White, the poet who's originally, I think, from Wales, the poet and writer calls the via negativa, and it's not what I would recommend as a great life course, but it's basically where you're kind of clueless about where you would like to go, but you're very clear where you don't want to go.
Right.
And I knew I didn't want to go home, and so I needed a job in order to stay here. And it's not like today I would say I really love Ann Arbor and have enormous respect for the town, and it's a pretty special place. But at the time, it was more just like I didn't know where else to go, and so I decided I would look for a job. I had driven a taxi part-time while I was in school, which wasn't all that much fun. One of my roommates was waiting tables in a restaurant in Ann Arbor, and so I went in there and applied for a job as a server also, and they interviewed me and said they'd call me. I waited a couple of weeks. They hadn't called me. I waited 2 more weeks. I went back. I reapplied as a busboy. They said they'd call me. I again waited about 2 weeks, and they still hadn't called me, so I went back and said, hey, I'll do anything, and do you have any job at all? And they said, do you want to wash dishes? And I said, sure, not knowing that generally you're not supposed to want to wash dishes. And they had me start that night. So that's how I got going. So I have, I'd love to tell you this wonderful story about how I grew up with this great family tradition of cooking. And my mom was this amazing cook. And from the time I was 10 years old, I knew I wanted to open my own place, but none of that's true. My mom was a good person, but not a particularly good cook. And I grew up on what here in the States, I guess you could call the mid 20th century industrial diet. So I don't know
Right.
how it converts over to the UK, but macaroni and cheese from the box and frozen, I guess you would call them fish fingers. We call them fish sticks.
Yeah.
I don't know if Pop-Tarts exist over there.
We get them.
Jello.
But I think they're more of an import sort of thing.
Yeah. It's a high class upscale imported item over there. But anyway, and then I really had no experience in business or even thoughts you could go into business because everybody in my family were really teachers and lawyers and doctors and dentists and that sort of thing. So I was kind of the failure for not going back to school to get a law degree or something like that. But anyway, I really just lucked out because I stumbled into great people. So Paul Saginaw, who's been my partner in all this from the beginning, was the general manager at that restaurant. Frank Carollo, who's one of the partners in our bakery now, was a line cook. And Maggie Bayless, who's one of the partners in Zing Train, which is our training business, was a waitress. So that's how we met, and we've been working together most of 40 years now, which is awesome. And then also I stumbled into work that I really love, so I came to love food and cooking and the food world and the restaurant world. So that's how I got started. I worked at that restaurant group for about 4 years.
Always washing dishes?
No. I was a good dishwasher, so I started prepping and line cooking, and then the last 2 years managing kitchens. So whatever, I don't love the word chef, but basically running the kitchens and managing that way. Paul left about halfway through that and opened a little seafood market here in town with Mike Monahan, who's another gentleman that we've known for a long time. And fall of 81, I had reached a point in that organization where, I didn't hate going to work. They were certainly not bad people. It's not a bad company. They're still here in town. But I guess intuitively I could sense more and more where they were headed organizationally was not where I wanted to head. And so November 181, I finally decided that's it. I'm going to get out. So I gave 2 months notice, really unsure of what would be next, but it was just time to make a break and do something different. And Paul, not knowing I had given notice, called me and said there was this small building coming open near the fish market. And he had grown up in Detroit where you could get good delicatessen food, and the same in Chicago, but you couldn't get it here. And so somehow within like a week, we decided we were going to open. And then somehow 4.5 months later, we were open, which included renovating the building, costing the menu, getting products in, et cetera, et cetera. And so March 15th will be our 38th anniversary. And we opened up with 2 employees, and we had a 25 sandwiches on the menu. So, a lot of what people in the UK might imagine, but delicatessen, Jewish delicatessen food. And then also at the time, what now you would call specialty food, but at the time was just kind of unusual and a little bit weird, like extra virgin olive oil and honey and stuff, which was barely known in this part of the world at that time.
So it's like a curation sort of effort in
many
ways.
But at the time it was pretty out there. I mean, and it was very unusual to do both restaurant and what we call retail here, or specialty grocery, or whatever you might call it, there in the same small building. I don't know how to translate it into the metric system, but it was 1,300 square foot building, and we had just 2 employees and me and Paul. So that's how we got going. Fast forwarding to today, and then you can ask me anything in between. We have created or helped to create a community of businesses here in the Ann Arbor area. So depending how you count, we have about a dozen businesses. Each is different. So I don't really like replicas. I like to create unique things. But we operate as one organization with these semi-autonomous pieces within it. They're all within 15 or 20 minutes of each other, so all here in the same town. Each has its own specialty. Each has managing partners who run, that business day to day and own part of that business. And we have about 700 employees total. 18 managing partners, 200 staff people own a share in the business. And we have the deli has expanded 1, 2, 3 times. We have a bakery, a little creamery, a coffee roasting business, a candy business. We have a old by American standards, new by British standards farmhouse from the 1830s and barn from the 1830s that we renovated to do weddings and events and stuff. We have a little Korean restaurant. I'm sitting now at Zingerman's Roadhouse, which is it's all regional American food, beer and wine and that sort of thing. Our mail order business, and then Zing Train is our training business. And last but not least, we have a little food tour business. So we take small groups of 15 or so people, go with Christy Brableck. She's the managing partner of that business, and they'll go visit like food producers, wineries and stuff that we would work with. So awesome. That was a long answer to your question, but there you go.
That's great. I mean, I love the idea that you started washing dishes. I mean, because it's something that I've done in the past, just as like a summer job when I was at sort of school or university. And what's fascinating is that sometimes the dirtiest jobs give you the best insight in terms of how things work.
Yeah.
When you're stuck in the bowels of things, you can see how everything can actually really works and knits together, and what people like and what they don't like and all that sort of stuff. Because almost you're dealing with the what's left behind.
Yep, absolutely.
So you talked about this studying kind of history, particularly Russian history, with a specialism on anarchism, and that's the thing that really sort of like struck me, because you've written a lot of books. I mean, a number of books, which I can't remember the exact number, and I've got quite a few of them, and they are. Some of them
I can't remember either. It's okay.
Yeah. But anyway, there's a theme that runs through that. You talked about this theme around the idea of anarchism, and here's the thing: it's like anarchism is like. Do you have Marmite in the US?
We do. It's not that popular, but we.
But you understand the Marmite concept.
And I know exactly what it is. Yes.
Yeah, you understand the Marmite concept. Sort of is like going. It's you either kind of love it or hate it. There's no kind of like two ways about it, right?
Yep.
And in many ways, it seems to me that kind of anarchism is this term that gets kind of used, and it can either kind of intrigue you or turn you off, particularly how it's portrayed.
Yeah.
Given that you're a student of it, and actually, I told you this before, is when we spoke prior to the podcast, is that actually anarchism is something that I studied as well as a part of a radical political economy course when I was at university.
Yep.
Now, it's an often misunderstood term because there's also lots of bad press that goes out about it.
Yep.
Can you explain to me what you mean by kind of anarchism and what we can learn from
I think, as you said, I mean, people react to the name because it's been used it's been misrepresented so regularly over the centuries, and 100 years ago and change, anarchism was sort of the devil, and in fact, literally 100 years ago, there was a Immigration Act in the United States that prevented you from coming into the country. If you were an anarchist, you could be expelled or not allowed in as a potential immigrant. But anyway, there's no formal definition, and by definition, anarchism of all philosophies definitely doesn't have a formal definition. There's no hierarchy of ways to explain it. So it's really each of us gets to have our own version. But the common misconception is that it's about bomb throwing, chaos, destruction. And, have there been people who were anarchists that threw bombs? Absolutely. But there have also been, pick your philosophy and your religion and your national identity, you can find people in every one of those that's thrown a bomb, in the name of their cause. So that doesn't make the entire cause to be a terrible thing. So, for me, anarchism is really just a positive belief in people. The belief that everybody is a creative, intelligent, caring human being who wants to do good things, and the belief that hierarchy, while helpful in the moment from an operational standpoint, in terms of, if you're on a football team on the field, somebody might be calling the play, but it doesn't make that person a better human being, and it doesn't necessarily mean they know the right answer. It just means that somebody in the moment, when you have 3 seconds to make a decision, somebody may need to do that. So getting out of hierarchical thinking is a big part of it. And then involving people, it's commonly misconceived to be about chaos, but it's actually all about organization. It's just that it involves the people who are part of the organization in designing the organization of which they're a part, rather than imposing it from some hierarchically removed place.
I think the kind of interesting thing, because I think it was mentioned in the, you wrote this booklet essay thing called Going Into Business with Emma Goldman, which we'll come back to.
Okay.
And I think there's a reference in that about from Immanuel Kant about he identified 4 different kinds of government, and he said that force with freedom and law is characterized as a republic. Without freedom and law is barbarism. Law and force without freedom is despotism. But law and freedom without force is anarchy.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful thing, because it's a really very, very clever play on the law, freedom, and force combinations.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that's a? I mean, I think that's a
beautiful way to say it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, and I sort of wanted to say that out loud, kind of on the recording, because I think it's a very intriguing way of characterizing kind of like systems and the law and freedom without force. But I think I also wanted to kind of ask about, because you talked about in the books, many of them are subtitled a lapsed anarchist approach to ... And I'm like going, Ari, what happened? It's like, why lapsed?
I'm less and less lapsed. But so the story of that is, I studied it. I liked it. I was drawn to it in hindsight for many good reasons, both personally and just in terms of life philosophy, just around, it always encouraged people to be themselves, which is the opposite of the constant social pressure to conform, which is everywhere, family pressure to conform, et cetera. And also, it was speaking about, individual health and freedom in a way that I wasn't hearing from other people.
Right.
And so I was drawn to it. Then when I started, in restaurants, it was the last thing on my mind, really. When I started to manage people, I, sort of attempted to, immaturely, whatever the word is, put it into place by leaving people essentially to do the right thing on their own, which didn't work at all. And so then for years...
Why did that not work, do you think?
Because I think people still need leadership and they still need structure. It's just, you can be an effective leader, but not think you're a better person than the person you're leading. And you can still understand that the dishwasher has perspectives that are of value.
Right.
As much of value as your own as the leader. They're just different. And
do you also think that it's like stating the obvious, we're a product of our own education system and experience, how we've been taught to think and decide and do all these different sort of evaluate sort of
things. Absolutely. And you can't, a restaurant of size, it's an organization. I mean, and it needs systems. It's just the difference in the old model would be that the boss, the 2 managers get together and then tell everybody what the system's going to be. And, what I tried to do was do it with no system, and that didn't really work. What I would do now is say to people, we need to design a system. Let's get to work. What do you think we need to do? And then, slowly you're teaching people systems thinking so that they can participate in the creation of the system of which they're a part. Right. And, as the manager, whatever, I might have the final say, but the reality is the group's going to come up with something with some guidance.
Yes.
During the process, the leader might say, hey, we got 2 more days to get this finished, or, so there's still coaching, we've heard from you, Billy, let's hear from Susan, so that there's still coaching involved, but that it's done always with respect for everybody, in an inclusive way. So anyways, when I started to manage people, I tried to sort of do it in a, not particularly well thought out way. It didn't really work. So then for years when I would talk about it, that's where the lapsed anarchist came from, because I said I still believed in it, but I had stopped practicing.
Right. Okay.
And
I think the thing is about it's like it's like an aspirational thing around kind of we want things to be free, but actually we've got to understand it's contextual, right? Yeah,
and there's more to it than that, and that having freedom and inclusivity is work, and it's not going to just happen by itself, which is sort of what I had believed might be. So fast forwarding, I really didn't do much with it for, I don't know, let's see, probably 25 years. And then about 10, 12 years ago, I got asked to speak at the Jewish Studies Department. And by that point, I was speaking pretty regularly at business conferences and when I gave my background, I might reference having studied the anarchists, and people would sort of chuckle nervously, and then I would move on to business topics, so it didn't really matter. But when I agreed to speak at the Jewish Studies Department, Deborah Dashmore, who at the time was the head of the department, and she titled the talk "Rye Bread and Anarchism" or "Anarchism on Rye" or something. And
Right.
I thought, oh, that's cute. That sounds great. Let's go with it. And it was about 9-10 months from when she asked me till when the talk was going to be. So I didn't really worry much about it until I got about 3 months out. And then, I thought to myself, like, at business conferences, nobody knows anything about anarchism, so it doesn't really matter. But when I'm going to go talk to the Jewish Studies Department, these are people who actually studied Emma Goldman and all these other people that I also studied, and I'm going to look like an idiot because they're going to ask me about it. It's in the title of the talk, and I haven't looked at these books in decades.
Right.
So I literally went and got my old books out, and I started to reread them. And long story short, it blew my mind. Really for two reasons. A, it made me realize how much of the way we were running the organization was actually aligned with a lot of that work, even though I hadn't realized it consciously. And then B, what really, really blew my mind is how much of what they were writing about is now called progressive business.
Right.
It's just that people like Jim Collins are going on the bestseller list, and they were going to jail.
Yeah. I know, it's kind of odd. It's a bit like going, it's almost a bit like it would be anathema to people to recognize kind of like, oh, there's something we can learn from anarchism.
Yeah, well, it's starting to happen though. And through the work we do, there's no question that it's exposed a lot more people to it. And actually there's an Englishman named Karn Ross.
Okay.
I don't know if you and I talked about it, but he's in the UK. He was in the States for a little bit, but he was in the British Foreign Service for a long time. Independent Diplomat is his website, and you can read his story in his own book. But he basically was in the Foreign Service, became so disenchanted by over the years between what he was being told to say and what had actually happened, and how they were incongruous.
Right.
And then he ended up sort of arriving through study at anarchist thinking. I mean, resigned from the Foreign Service as part of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think because what was fascinating to me is that, so I'd studied people like, the Malatestas and the Bakunins of this world.
Yep.
But you're particularly interested and tell the story of Emma Goldman.
Yep.
And so can you tell me about kind of her? Because she was a force.
Yeah. She was a force. She
force of nature.
Was born in Lithuania in 1869, and she came to the United States in 1885. So at the age of 16, and I think like me and maybe you and a lot of other people, in a sense, you can see like anarchist rebellion happening at 8. One of the lines I love from her is she said, "Every child is an anarchist at heart," which I think is true.
Yes.
Rollo May, the mid-20th century psychologist, fascinating guy, said the opposite of courage is not cowardice, it's conformity. And I think there's clearly in every society enormous pressure to conform. But anyway, she left there because she didn't want to conform and become, the sort of middle class or lower middle class Jewish housewife that her father wanted her to be. And she ended up coming here, and then really within 5-6 years, so in her early 20s, she was already speaking to groups of 5,000-6,000 people, which, if you understand at that time, think back, 5,000 people meant literally 5,000 men.
Yes.
And that was with no PA system, no microphone, no speakers. So you have this little 5'1" woman, speaking from a stage and captivating 5,000 people. Is pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah,
absolutely. So she was a force. And J. Edgar Hoover, who I don't know how well known he is in the UK, but he was, I don't know, for probably 40, 50 years, the head of the FBI here in the US, and a little bit notorious, let's say, called her the most dangerous woman in America. She went to jail. She was finally deported from the country in 1919. but anyway, I think she was quite a creative thinker and certainly an imperfect human being, just like me and probably you.
Mm-hmm.
But she really laid out some very interesting philosophical frameworks that I believe are totally applicable today and really would help all of us.
There are these kind of like frameworks. I mean, because in that essay, which is kind of the thing that I must admit, I haven't read all of the books because there's a lot of them. I've got a few of them, and then they're great, and they're kind of like well bound and heavy and stuff. And I'm thinking, blimey, I wish I'd got the e-version of it, so then I don't have to carry it around because they're big things.
Yeah, we do make essays and pamphlets too.
Yeah,
so
which is the one that I'm really interested in is the one that the Going into Business with Emma Goldman, which is the 18 lessons for business and life. I mean. Without going kind of through kind of all of the 18, because there's a lot in there, and I'm particularly interested in trying to improve service and experience both from a customer and employee kind of like side. I mean, can you share some of the kind of the lessons of the frameworks that you've learned from Goldman that would be applicable?
Absolutely. So in no particular order in the moment. Some of the things that I think she was talking about that are really great business lessons. One is that to remember that the means that we use, so the way we work every day, every interaction that we have, need to be congruent with the ends that we're trying to achieve if things are really going to work.
Right.
Okay. So it seems simple, but if you look at organizations, it's all too common to find the boss, the leader, the owner, whatever, yelling at the employees because they gave bad service.
Right. Yeah. Completely.
Which doesn't work. And so, if we want to create an organization where people feel valued and honored, that starts from the minute they get here, and it starts with me and the partners honoring those people. Because they are our future, they are our present. And so every tiny action that we take must be congruent with the ends that we want to achieve. And that's a really good reminder, because I think, it's not that common to find that kind of congruence.
Yes.
So that's a big one.
That's great. I mean, what reminds me, you kind of mentioned it earlier about systems thinking. And I was speaking to a gentleman, I don't know if you've heard of, he's a big systems thinker here in the UK, a guy by the name of John Seddon. Mm-hmm. And he talked about how, we want to build organizations that are outside in their thinking.
Yep.
But we don't design our systems to facilitate. Our systems are designed inside out.
Yep.
And so we end up trying to force people into the way that so we're not structured our outside in thinking only goes so far. It only kind of gets to the edge of the organization.
Yep.
It actually doesn't seep all the way through to the roots, as it were.
Yep.
And so that's where it creates all these kind of problems, which is exactly to your point, that it's not congruent.
Yep.
How you organize yourself internally isn't congruent with what you want to try and achieve from an external outcomes perspective.
Absolutely. And all of that is dissonance, which slowly but surely erodes one's spirit, erodes one's passion and belief in the organization and in the work that we're doing. So anyway, that certainly was a big one. Another one is she understood that people need more than just a job, right? So she said the human mind cannot endure sameness and monotony. And this was, written 100 years ago or more. So she said every sensitive being abhors the idea of being treated as a mere machine or as a mere parrot of conventionality and respectability. The human being craves recognition of his kind. So, she understood that people really, it wasn't enough to just put them in a job, and, that was one step up perhaps from enslavement or serfdom in Russia, but it really was still, you sold your time to the boss for 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever it was. And so the inverse, and what I think she really was leading towards, and I think it's a huge piece of what we try to do here, is that from the beginning, we're involving people in running the organization. Yeah. And teaching them how to think like leaders from the minute they begin. So, the opposite of that is what's much more common, which is you just teach people how to do their job. But the problem is they don't understand, whatever metaphor you want to use, what the game that they're playing. They only understand how to play their position.
Right.
And the decisions that people make as a result of that are generally poor, if not downright silly.
Yes.
There's actually an English anarchist named Colin Ward, who I'm paraphrasing, but once said, society makes its morons and then despises them for it. And I think he's right on. And so this insight that she had, is really big, because it's really understanding that, of course there's drudgery and of course there's monotony in the work, just like the greatest musicians in the world spend hours practicing, but they do it with purpose, to create something special. And they understand how they're, if they're the cello player in the orchestra, the violin player in the orchestra, they understand how the violin fits with the rest of the composition that the group is playing. And that's a huge difference. So that's a second one. Another one is just understanding that work, which is now commonly discussed in the progressive business world, but that work needs to be a positive experience for people. So I'll read, if it's okay, just
Sure.
a little quote from her, which is really a lot of what caught my attention when I started to restudy, because she wrote this in 1910.
Mm-hmm.
She said she was talking about anarchism, but I immediately transposed it to the way that we work here at Zingerman's. She said, our goal is the freest possible expression of all the latent powers of the individual, which is only possible in a state of society where man is free to choose the mode of work, the conditions of work, and the freedom to work. One to whom the making of a table, the building of a house, or the tilling of the soil is what the painting is to the artist and discovery to the scientist, the result of inspiration, of intense longing and deep interest in work as a creative force. And when I read that, I'm like, man, this is what we're trying to do, because we have people making sandwiches or baking bread or whatever that are, but we're treating them like, I want them to feel like they're making meaningful art, music, whatever. And she understood that long before this was going on. And, in the current day, so Rich Sheridan is a guy here in town who owns a great business called Menlo Innovation. They do software design, but they're very progressive. And he came out with a book a couple of years ago called Joy Inc., which actually I think references us. But like, she was writing about joy in the workplace 120 years ago.
Yes. It's, I think it's like, it's spot on. It makes me think about the, and I know that you've talked about it a lot, and it's almost a bit like your philosophical starting point.
Yep.
In many ways. And you talk about it in terms of beliefs.
Yep.
And deep, am I right in saying that what you believe is the foundation for pretty much everything about this?
Yeah, I think it's the foundation for everybody's life. I mean, I as you said, one of those actually the heaviest of those books, because it's about 600 pages long.
Yep.
Is about beliefs, and it's a subject that I hadn't really thought about. Which sounds silly, because I was teaching business and leadership, and like you have read dozens and hundreds or whatever of books. But when I talk about beliefs, I'm not really talking about religion, sports, and politics, which are three areas of belief also, but those are the three most commonly conversed about, and in which, in my perspective, hardly anyone ever changes their mind about any of the three. But regardless, in this context, it's much more about beliefs about work, beliefs about human beings, beliefs about human nature, beliefs about quality of coffee, beliefs about how many hours one should work. I mean, all of that stuff, and understanding that really pretty much all our decisions, other than sort of instinctive responses to if somebody throws a rock at us and we duck, or if we're dying of thirst and we reach for water, those are instinctive. But beyond that, pretty much everything we do is based on what we believe. So how we treat the cashier at the supermarket is based on our beliefs.
Yes.
And there's other factors of emotional stuff that are at play, but ultimately, under pressure, we'll revert back to what we really believe as opposed to what we're taught we, quote, should believe. And
Well,
Emma Goldman understood that. She was actually writing about beliefs, and she actually wrote a pamphlet 125 years ago called What I Believe. And it really, she understood that beliefs could be changed. She understood that beliefs are not genetic. And she understood that our beliefs really need to be, again, congruent with the ends that we're trying to achieve, or we'll fail.
yeah. I think it's also kind of true that the kind of many people don't necessarily examine their true beliefs, and they just follow
No,
it.
not at all. Yeah, there's a quote I put in the Power of Beliefs book from Carl Jung, who said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will control our lives and we will call it fate.
Yes.
And I love that, because I realized from doing that work, even for me, who, like you, was, conversing, talking, speaking, coaching, whatever, and running a business in a pretty conscious way, I really had not thought about the power of beliefs and what was really happening. And, just the beliefs that we have about really anything, reading books, beliefs about public speaking, beliefs about people, on the front line have beliefs about managers, et cetera, and beliefs about business. And then starting to understand that whole book is really based around a self-fulfilling belief cycle, which I learned from Bob and Judith Wright in Chicago, and they can't remember where they learned it, so I don't know who to give ultimate credit to. But it's a self-fulfilling belief cycle, which is playing out in all our lives every day. Is essentially we have beliefs. We don't, as you said, know what they are, but we have them. We take action based on those beliefs. Most of the time, people around us will form their own beliefs based on the way we act. And then they will in turn act on their beliefs, which it turns out 95% of the time will reinforce our original belief. So if for instance, I, as a leader in an organization, believe that training and education for the staff is a waste of time, then what action will I take? It's fairly simple. We will put no money, time, or energy into creating training programs for the staff. What does the staff start to believe then about their role in the organization, their potential future for development, et cetera? Well, it's kind of grim, so they show up, but they don't do great work as a result. And then because they're not doing great work, as the leader, I go, see, I knew it was a good move not to waste money on training.
Right.
By contrast, if I, as the leader, do what we do here, which is we believe teaching people education, learning about the job and about leadership and business is an essential part of our work. We put a ton of time into it. We have, 75, 80 different internal classes we teach. We give books out regularly, et cetera. The people who came in here to work, with the idea they'd be here for 6 months or a year because it's a, food job, turn out to become really interested in business and turn out, we tap into their potential and what they're doing. So they start to believe in the organization, they start to believe in themselves, and they do great work. And then we go, wow, this training's really working.
Yeah.
And the irony is it's the same employee base in both of those scenarios.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back to the idea of the movement around progressive business practices and the progressive business kind of movement, and the kind of the parallels and the lessons that can be learned from anarchism and the building and management of a progressive org. Because I think that I've seen a lot of people talking about this, and they're trying to be progressive, but they sometimes come a cropper in many places. And I think that I was thinking about this, and I was going back to the Kantian sort of like 4 kinds of government thing. And I was thinking that I wonder if they're trying to be anarchist in nature, but they end up building a republic rather than a progressive, because actually they can't move away from the force bit.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. And I think that, I believe from the beliefs work, I learned that if you hold negative beliefs, you create negative outcomes.
Right.
Positive beliefs create positive outcomes. Neutral beliefs don't do much of anything. And I started to understand that, if I believe that my coworker, my partner, whatever, is kind of a jerk, I'm going to treat them awkwardly, and it's not going to go well, and it's going to self-fulfill into negativity. Now, I'm not saying just changing the belief makes everything great, but I do know that holding the negative belief won't work.
Yes.
So I think to your point, I mean, if people don't even know that they have these beliefs, it's playing out all day long. The whole society around them is teaching them that hierarchy and the boss taking charge is the way it's supposed to be. And it's not easy to go against the current, right? It's a lot of work. And so I think one of the things in hindsight that we, imperfectly, but that we've done pretty well here is to create pretty good governance models, which we use a consensus model for decision-making at the partner level, which, one can argue, and it's not inaccurate. It does take longer to get to agreement through consensus. It's just, the question is whether it's more effective, right? And so because people have been trained with this belief that the leader's got to put their foot down and take charge, and you can't just let people talk all day. And, then you're right. They get frustrated, which I understand. I get frustrated too. And they tend to put their foot down. The problem is the people on whom they've put their foot will go along with it, but they don't believe in it. When they don't believe in it, the quality of the work goes down a lot. And also I think I've seen, quite a few places where it's not out of ill intention, but it's just, the founders started the business. It was small like ours was. It makes sense that you're making the decisions. You have 3-4 employees. It doesn't matter, but 20 years later, they have 200, 400 employees, and they're still basically acting like the king and queen, and it's not ill intended, and they might be benevolent king and queen, but the problem is people can't really work without them.
Sure. Yeah. So that no, absolutely. So, I mean, so the couple things occurred to me is that the sometimes, if we talk about it, all starts with beliefs, but I guess if you want to, I guess you're kind of also suggesting that you can change your beliefs.
Absolutely.
It's not just about articulating new beliefs, but it's almost a bit like you have to learn new beliefs, and that comes through actions, or like articulating a new set of beliefs and then adopting a certain actions that then kind of reinforce those.
Yes, and it's easier said than done because some of the big learnings I had from the work around the Power of Beliefs in Business book were beliefs are not genetic.
Yes.
No one is born with racist beliefs. No one is born believing hierarchy is better. No one is born believing good coffee matters, right? It's all learned. And so our beliefs are learned from people that we trust. When we're, tiny kids, infants, we don't, our parents are the ones that we believe, for better or for worse, and for worse. But as we grow older, then we're learning from friends on the playground, from teachers, from books, from the news, from now social media, and beliefs are being formed all the time. Because they're not genetic, they can be changed.
Sure.
Right? So, but it is work. And I started to look metaphorically at beliefs as the root system of our lives, because you can't see them, but everything that pops up above the surface line, of course, is 100% correlated to the root system.
Yeah.
And, if you're 40 and you've had a belief that you got from your parents, if your father repeated endlessly that women couldn't be good leaders, right? And then, of course, some women leaders fail. So you found a lot of evidence to prove that that belief was valid. And every time you ran into a woman manager who did something you didn't like, you used it as more evidence to reinforce that belief. So now you have 40 years of believing women can't be leaders. Yeah. When a new one gets hired into your organization, you're going to be looking for her faults, which she'll have, because we all have them.
Sure.
And that goes on. So now does one have to stay with that belief the rest of their life? No, of course not. But it's not that easy to change them. And you have to really make a conscious choice to do the work of changing it. Yeah. There's a recipe I wrote in the book about how to change a belief. Uh-huh. And, sometimes beliefs change just by accident. Let's say, people have been trained or raised with the belief that, in the U.S. that black people are inferior, they're terrible, whatever. But then one day a guy's in a car accident and he's saved by an African American, and all of a sudden his whole belief system changes in a heartbeat, right? but for the most part, it needs to be a conscious choice. And if we have 40 years of root system, it's not going to go away in a day.
No, sure. I mean, it's
So
a bit like, are you familiar with the work of Philip Seligman?
Martin Seligman.
Oh, Martin Seligman, I think,
Yes,
yes.
absolutely. The positive psychology. Yep.
Yeah. And so not the kind of the happy clappy positive psychology type stuff,
No.
but the proper science. I mean,
Yep.
I'm a real fan of his work.
Yep.
He talked about the idea of like, we can learn optimism, or we can learn a positive outlook.
Yep.
So like exactly how you're saying is that
absolutely.
He's going, it's hard work. Some people are just more disposed to that based on their experience and kind of, and the value system, the belief system they've kind of all grown up with, but it can be learned, and the science is there to support it.
Absolutely. It all can be learned. I mean, if you look at it, and beliefs have changed. I mean, there's just no question about it. I mean, look at what, even in science, what people believed about germs is completely different than what was believed, 175 years ago. Even in the United States, whatever. I mean, if you look at the incongruity of, the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, but, saying all men are created equal except for the ones that weren't. And even, the Civil War, but Native Americans in the U.S. weren't allowed to vote until, I think, 1924 or 1927. Right. So it's, and those are social issues, but in a business context, more importantly for our conversation, if you believe that busboys are stupid, you're going to treat them like they're stupid, then they're going to act like they're stupid, then they're going to make some stupid decisions, which cost us a lot of time and money by fixing bad customer experience, going back to a lot of your other work. And I believe that's coming from us, not from the busboy.
Yeah. And it's something I'm interested in as well, because I think there's fascinating distinctions and differences that exist in how we interpret the word service, and what it means to work in service, and how we think about service positions and those people that work in service across different cultures, value systems, geographies, languages, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
And until we understand kind of how we think about those sort of things, we end up kind of like we were doing things almost unconsciously, because we don't know what's, as you say, the root system. We don't know what's driving those kind of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading one of your articles, which I thought was great, about the importance of getting out with the customer.
Yeah.
Right. And, so this is a classic example, right? So people have been raised with the organizational belief that as you move up in an organization's hierarchy, that, of course, you need to be in the office and you've got to call your team together and have a meeting. And, the work of being out, doing, whatever you want to call it, scut work in the medical world, or becomes unimportant. And so people become isolated, right? So, I don't have that belief, but it's a very common belief. And then the result is what you've described, right? Which is people trying to make decisions when all they have is statistics, which are, and as I think, as you said, the data is not the customer.
Yeah, sure.
Which I agree with. How do you combat that? Well, I don't hold that belief, right? So I work on the floor at the Roadhouse almost every night, pouring water and helping bus tables. And it might be an hour, it might be 2 hours, whatever, but it's regrounding. I see the customer, I look them in the eye, I see what they're eating, what they're not eating. Tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, I get to the deli at about 7 o'clock in the morning when we open. And I just, work at a table out in the dining room.
Nice.
Customers come and they tell me stuff. I see stuff.
Yeah.
Some of them don't know who I am, which is fine. But I can see how they're interacting. Some of them know who I am, which they like because the owner's on site. So, but that's all coming from beliefs.
Yeah, and I think the thing I find fascinating is that I think one of my favorite kind of like business TV shows or sort of like formats is like the Undercover Boss series, which you have in the US, and we've had it here in the UK and stuff as well. And the thing I find fascinating about it is, one, how all these things are so revelatory to these kind of these execs that they go and they find such problems with systems and practices and everything else, which is fundamentally down to how they've set things up from the head office. And then they find all these wonderful people doing wonderful work and with great pride and great skill and things. And it's amazing. And it's a very moving thing. And I'm a bit of an emotional guy. I can't fail to not cry or like shed a tear at the end when they kind of like, there's that whole show and tell sort of like thing. And it still fascinates me that this stuff is like so revelatory for people. But I guess my question in all of that is that thinking about being more progressive and thinking about being more adaptable in this kind of modern world and sort of thinking about learning stuff from anarchist principles. I mean, when we talk about anarchy, I mean, it's a system of governance in many ways.
I think it's more, I would say what I came to realize, it's really a way of life.
Right.
And it's a belief system. And it's actually, so in an interesting way, Gustav Landauer, who was a very, to me, fascinating German anarchist, early 20th century, who was a pacifist actually, but was killed by the German army in 1919. Anyway, but he said, in a way that really resonated with me, he said, we have no political beliefs. We have beliefs against politics.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's actually, this is where people's belief systems are so entrenched that they can't even conceive, but it's actually about how you treat the person next to you and how you treat yourself. And that's really what it's about. Whereas a political system is much more about how do we change the things at the top, which isn't necessarily bad, but this is about how I treat the cashier at the supermarket. It's how I treat the dishwasher. It's how I treat my significant other when I go home and she's there. How do I treat her? You know, because if everybody's treating everybody with care, consideration, and kindness, wouldn't it be a better place?
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, because my question I wanted to ask was, and I think you might have just answered it, is like, is that what it means to be a citizen, in inverted commas, and both a citizen and a leader within a progressive organization? Or,
I think it's a lot of it. I mean, I think there's, don't misunderstand. I mean, there's still decisions that need to get made, but but that we're trying to make them in an inclusive way. So just, here's really practical things that over the years have played out here. Pretty much all our meetings are open. Yeah. So you want to come. Right. We'll pay you. Why? Because we have the belief that you have insight on your third day, that as people who, Paul and I have been here 38 years, right? I could try to have beginner's mind, but I don't. And so if you don't like what we're doing, then show up. Yeah. And if you don't show up, I understand that it's awkward, but FYI, it's awkward for me too.
Yes.
and that this is what it's about, right? And so something simple like that it changes everything. So like once a month we have what we call the Zingerman's Wide Huddle, right? So this is essentially like the board of directors meeting or the top level managers meeting, whatever, in another organization. So typically you would have those top 20 people come and they would report to each other, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we do that, but it's open. So there's 40 or 50 non-partners show up at the meeting every month.
Right.
Right. Sometimes their questions are better than the partners. Sometimes their insights are better than the partners. If 50 people are there, it means there's 650 that aren't there. However, I'm going to tell you flat out, the difference between choosing not to go and participate is very different than the feeling of not being allowed to go and participate.
Totally.
And the fact that they could go, that the notes go out to the whole organization, it doesn't fix there's no one thing that's going to fix all the problems, but the typical employee in an organization of our size, or even a smaller one, has the belief that the bosses are hiding stuff, that they're, making these secret plans to screw everybody over. And maybe they are, but most of the time, I think most people in business are just trying to figure out how to stay in business.
Sure.
And that we're all failing and we're all falling short and we're all struggling to figure out good answers. And by involving all these other people in the conversation, A, you get better insights because they have them. B, you're helping them understand that leadership is not about certainty and never being afraid. It's about being afraid and being uncertain and still making a decision to go forward together anyway. And so you're really changing their beliefs from the beginning. And, that simple act makes an enormous difference.
Awesome. So, Ari, I just have a couple more things I want to ask you about. One is the kind of like, I find I could talk to you for hours about this sort of like stuff because I'm just a bit of a nerd that way. But I know that also that people that are listening to this or reading the stuff that are right or just wanted to get better at things, particularly like service experience.
Absolutely.
It's kind of really helpful to boil it down to some simple stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, if I said to you, somebody wants to improve their service experience, they want to be a bit more open and progressive and responsive and adaptable as an organization. What's the one or two things that you think? You should
so we have a number of things that we do. There's a smaller book that I wrote about customer service.
Got that.
And we teach in there, which we teach everybody, 3 steps to great service and 5 steps to handling complaints. And people learn that really from the get-go. One of the things in the context of the anarchist stuff, so the 3 steps are not a script. It's a recipe. And I very much like to distinguish between recipes and standard operating procedures. So standard operating procedures is what they need to use in the operating room at the hospital or in the Air Force when the plane's going to take off, because you're not really interested in the creative application of flight safety, by the pilot, right? But with customer service, it can't be a standard operating procedure because every customer is different and every situation is different. And so what we're doing is giving people a recipe which guides them towards a good outcome, but requires them to use their creative intelligence. And super practical, easy to learn. Takes years to master it. Even when you master it, you still make mistakes, just like the best musician still misses a note here and there. But it's a life process. So those are really simple, but they're very teachable and very practical. And to the point of the anarchist stuff, it's encouraging people to think instead of, the scripts that are given in most corporate settings, which tell you like, say this, then say this, then say this. But the problem is, that the customer, you're dishonoring the customer's uniqueness and you're dishonoring the uniqueness of the situation. So that's a very practical one. Another very practical thing that's been enormously helpful here, I learned from a woman who's a good friend of mine. You could have her on your podcast also, Anese Kavanaugh, A-N-E-S-E, Kavanaugh with a C. She's out in California, and a lot of her work is based around energy management. So not natural resources on the planet, but natural resources in the human sort of way. And so we adapted what we learned from her, and we teach it to everybody. So it's a job performance expectation at Zingerman's that you will bring positive energy to work. And we teach people 3 elements of energy. I wrote about this in part 2 of the leadership series, and there's a pamphlet version of it that's also available, and a PDF too. But that we teach these 3 elements of energy: your physical energy, your mental or emotional energy, and then what Anese calls your vibrational energy. So this is what people pick up from you. And then we have a simple 4-step recipe, right? And we teach it to everybody. Everybody can learn it. It's not hard. But it makes an enormous difference because, all this academic studies that one can look at are going to show you that, the amount of impact that the words we use have is like 10% of the equation at most. And most of it essentially is energetic presence, right? So those are some really simple, practical things. And, again, to our earlier part of our conversation, it's based on the belief that people are smart and can learn and want to learn. It's based on the belief that if we call on their intelligence after we give them these tools, that good things are going to come from it. And it works, and then it changes the guest experience in the process.
Awesome. So one final thing, Ari, because I've been doing, I published a book summer of last year called Punk CX.
Yes, I ordered one and they out of stocked it on me, and I just ordered another one.
Well, it should be coming kind of like soon, but the basic premise is that So I focus on service and experience. And the basic premise is that I think the service and experience space is becoming a bit like prog rock did in the 1970s.
I was around for that. That's very funny. Okay.
There you go. So it's like becoming overly complicated, elaborate, self-indulgent, and in danger of disappearing up its own arse.
Yep.
And punk exploded out the back of it with this DIY, democratic, dare to be different approach, right?
Yeah.
And it was all about heart and emotion and doing your thing.
Yeah.
And that made me think, I wonder what if the service and experience space is looking a bit like prog rock did, then what would a punk version of customer service or customer experience kind of look like? And that's what the book's about. And the book's, it's not like a standard book. It's not like 60,000 words of black ink on white pages.
Yep.
It's like colorful. It's like a fanzine. It's designed like an album.
Yeah. Great.
And I call it a visual slap in the face for the customer service industry.
Yeah, but that's to Emma Goldman's point about things being congruent with the ends, the means being congruent with the ends that we want to achieve. You're doing that in that design, and that's one of the things people miss, right?
Yeah. So what I've been doing is I've been doing a piece of ongoing social research in these interviews. I've been asking people two things related to this concept, and the first one is, it's like a word association.
Yeah.
And if I said to you, what one or two words would come to mind if I said a punk approach to customer service or customer experience?
Yeah. Well, I guess what would be most meaningful for me would be just, and again, Emma Goldman said it too, but it's encouraging people to be themselves. And in this context, that you can deliver great customer experiences without abandoning who you are as a human being and your own individuality and creativity, which I would suggest in the corporate model or in your context, the prog rock version of service have suffused or lost that individuality. And what we're trying to do is encourage people to be creative individuals and give great service at the same time. And I think, great music, when it comes down to it, is always the passion and personality of the musician.
Sure. Absolutely.
But when you're trying to play what you're supposed to play as opposed to what you really believe, it gets lost,
It's just mechanical.
Yeah, and you get lost in the intricacies of rules that other people created instead of coming from the heart.
Yeah.
And, whoever you like to listen to, whether it was John Lydon or The Clash, or from that era, which I listened to all of them too.
Yeah.
X-Ray Specs and all of that, amazing music. They just started to break the rules, but in the end of the day, they made great music, and it came from the heart, and it was imperfect. But all human beings are imperfect. Nature's imperfect, and the world is imperfect. It's just trying to achieve greatness in a way that's true to who you are, that creates a positive impact on the people around us.
Perfect. And the second one that I've been asking is, if I said to you, what company or brand do you think is epitomizing that sort of punk ethos?
I don't know. I got to think about that. I think probably I hope we are to some degree.
Yeah.
But we're not.
I would say you certainly are. But it's almost a bit like, if I said to you a brand that stuck out for you kind of like recently, you just think, wow, I just think they are just smashing it.
I don't know. I have to think about it. It's not a company really, but there's some good folks in the Netherlands that I was thinking you might want to connect to. They have a blog. If you look up Corporate Rebels.
Yeah, no, I know those guys. Pim and Just.
Yeah. Yep. So they're doing some cool work. And again, they're working to be congruent in their activities with the ends that they're trying to achieve. And, they're young, and kudos to them for going out and creating something special.
Absolutely. I know those guys kind of well, and I've spoken to them about their book and their work a couple of times. And so, yeah, I'm really impressed with them. They're doing great work.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking too, I'm going to be back, I think, in Ireland, teaching in Dublin in the fall again. My friends have a Fumbly Cafe in Dublin, and I think they're totally doing it in an awesome way.
Awesome. The Ari, so tell me, the books that you've written and all the stuff about is they're not actually available on things like Waterstones or Barnes and Noble or Amazon and stuff. It's actually more from Zingerman's Press directly.
Yeah. Well, if anybody knows somebody at Whetstone, we'd be glad to wholesale it to them.
Okay, there you go.
We're not opposed. I'm not a big fan of Amazon particularly because the values are not really aligned with ours. But then we actually do all the design here in town ourselves, and then we print them here in town in Ann Arbor. So we're a little bit off the grid, and in the spirit of your punk CX work, it's much the same thing. So you mentioned that they feel solid, which I hope they are, and I hope they're intellectually and emotionally solid too, and impactful. But they can go on zingermanspress.com. Zingtrain.com is our training business, and they're also on there. Unfortunately, for some reason, I don't understand. International shipping is incredibly costly.
Yeah, no, I had to speak to Jenny over there.
We will do our best to make it work. And they also are on Google Books off our website, and also on PDFs for the pamphlets as single essays. So there's ways to make it work, and we're very committed to trying to get it. And we've shipped them, to Australia. We've shipped to Singapore, to the UK, of course, to Ireland, to wherever. So we can make it happen.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would say to people, I'll make sure I'll get all that linked up and stuff. And when we do the kind of the highlights and things, I would also kind of say that it's definitely worth the effort, because I've got a bunch of them and I'm kind of working my way kind of through them. But Ari, just wanted to say, first of all, congratulations on what you're doing, the success so far. I mean, I think it's kind of, I find it kind of inspirational. I also kind of like the idea that somebody else is taking kind of anarchism and, putting it into play, or the principles or the belief systems that surround it in the 21st century, particularly in the business context, because we spend so much of our time in work, as it were.
Yep.
And just want to say thank you for your time, sharing your time with us today. I mean, that's been awesome. Hopefully the coffee's been kind of like still warm as well.
Well, thank you. As you said, there's way more to say. I mean, we haven't talked about our visioning process or servant leadership or open book management. So maybe we'll do another conversation down the road. But I'll just add my personal email is ari@zingermans.com. So ari@zingermans.com. And then Zingtrain people will see that we have these training seminars, and people literally come from all over the world. Plenty have come from the UK. Niels Yarderi, our longtime friends and users of many of our approaches. The folks at Brindisa in London do some amazing Spanish food, have found quite a bit. So, please come on over. Ann Arbor's 25 minutes west of the Detroit airport, so it's a direct flight from London to Detroit, and it'd be an honor to have folks come over.
Well, thank you. I mean, and I'll make sure we'll do one of those kind of follow-up conversations, if not kind of 2 or 3.
You got it.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as we say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.